or El Mayo?
Yeah, that came a little bit later. But by the time I, met El Chapo de Mayo and Arturo Beltran Leyva, um, at my initial meeting, I was already selling 2,000 kilos of cocaine a month in Chicago and nearby cities like Milwaukee, Detroit, St. Louis. Um, and it came because, they kidnapped my twin brother.
Kidnapped your twin brother.
Yes, for a debt, that was owed, a $10 million debt. And, I had, you know, basically made enough friendships and always came through for every one of my suppliers that, I started calling in favors. And when the ransom call came, they basically said, "Hey, we work for Chapo Guzman, and Chapo Guzman kidnapped, your brother, and you need to come up with $10 million for a debt that was owed."
I mean, what is going through your mind in that moment? I mean, is there a real possibility that you're never going to see your brother again?
Absolutely. Besides me hearing that it was Chapo and me understanding being in the drug trade, understanding what that means, it was his second time being kidnapped at that time.
Wow.
The first time he had been kidnapped by law enforcement in Chicago. It was basically a corrupt Chicago police squad and a kidnapper, and they had kidnapped them for 3 4 days, and I ended up having to pay a $2.7 million ransom to rescue him. So at that time, I felt like I was already kind of like I already knew what to do.
Jay, you're saying a corrupt Chicago police officer, Chicago law enforcement, took your
Yes, ma'am.
brother and demanded a more than $2 million ransom from you to get him back?
Yes, ma'am.
And has any of this come to light? Is that officer still working? Tell me more
Um,
about this.
just to give you some background, so that officer was working with a paid informant for the Chicago police officer named Saul Rodriguez, and he was, I guess, working both sides. He actually almost made $1 million as an informant working for Chicago police, and eventually, I guess, he flipped his handler, and together they kidnapped many people, including my brother. I think they kidnapped over 43 people. And that case was part of like the first case out of Chicago that we actually cooperated on that
Wow.
led to indictment in Chicago, and it's a pretty famous case. The informant received 40 years. The police officer received a 19-year sentence, and I think he did 7 years total before he was released for COVID.
Wow.
Um,
So this was a corrupt Chicago police officer working in tandem with a confidential informant.
yes.
Wow.
For many people, people don't, believe that corruption exists, in the United States. They always think it's like something that only happens in Mexico, but yeah, it's common.
When your brother was kidnapped by the Sinaloa cartel, was he taken from the United States or was he in Mexico?
No, by that time we were on the run ourselves from an indictment out of Wisconsin, and he was actually taken by corrupt Mexican law enforcement
Where?
in